All right, our top story is in this morning's Washington Post, which is reporting that the Taliban and Hamid Karzai's Afghan government have begun secret high-level talks to negotiate an end to the war. Now, this is the first time the two groups have talked since discussions in Saudi Arabia broke down more than a year ago. Sources say these negotiations are different since this marks the first time that Taliban representatives are fully authorized to speak for the Afghan Taliban organization based in Pakistan. The meetings involve possible agreements that would put Taliban figures in the Afghan government and the withdrawal of U.S. and NATO troops for an agreed-upon deadline. Something to watch for sure, Andrea.
Well, General Petraeus has said, they have all said, if there are Taliban who accept the constitutional precepts, rights of women, human rights, who are willing to negotiate, that this is a path out of this miserable war. But my word, miserable, not the general's word, but they clearly are looking for an exit strategy.
Right.
It is offensive to a lot of people who have sacrificed to defeat the Taliban. I mean, we have viewed them as the enemy. But haven't they differentiated between certain Taliban and Mullah Omar? This apparently is Mullah Omar, the guy we ran out of Kabul. But the question is reconciliation. If they are willing, if Mullah Omar is willing, I mean, this is going to be a very hard sell to a lot of Americans, but if Mullah Omar is willing to accept what we have agreed is the Constitution of Afghanistan, who are we to say we're going to keep fighting because they're not willing to concede defeat?
Ezra, this is what we did in Iraq. Right. The same Iraqis, the same Sunnis that were killing young Americans in 03, in 04, in 05, in 06 became our allies in 07 and beyond.
I was going to say the same thing, and Andrea can speak to it better than I can, but this is what Petraeus does. It is how we know his name. The Anbar Awakening was a pragmatic decision to bring in people who'd been killing Americans with the understanding that the way you get fewer Americans to die is you get reconciliation in the country, and it worked. We believe it worked. So, you know, when Obama appointed Petraeus, this appears to have been part of the end game. He knew perfectly well what he was getting into, and Petraeus is a guy who believes you got to finish the war, and the way you finish the war is not that you kill all the other side, but you get the other side to stop killing the side you like.
Right, and especially in Afghanistan, it is an unachievable task, whether you call the group the Taliban or somebody else.
If we're willing to have Mullah Omar come back and compete for power and even take power, what are those Americans dying for?
Well, that's the question that is going to be asked. I mean, what they're going to have to figure out is Hamid Karzai is certainly not negotiating from strength, and he is, if anything, I mean, from Bob Woodward's book, we know on his meds, off his meds, according to Ambassador and former General Eikenberry. We think that, according to Woodward's reporting, he is diagnosed as a unbalanced person, let's just say.
But let me take a swing, though, Pat. It's a far different thing trying to rebuild Afghanistan in 2010 and beyond than it was in 2001, going in and going after Mullah Omar and destroying the sanctuary of Osama bin Laden, where al-Qaeda's epicenter in 2001, 2002 was in Afghanistan. Right. Now, we hear from the CIA director there may be 50 members of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. It is a radically different situation today than it was in 01.
I agree 100%.
And by the way, if Mullah Omar, this sounds horrible, but if Mullah Omar will share power in a way that will allow us to bring our troops home and stop spending $2 billion a week, and understands that if he becomes a safe haven for international terror again, we will go in and try to kill him again, I think that's a peace we can make.
Well, look, I gladly accept a deal like that, frankly, because I don't think we should be fighting this war right now. But if Mullah Omar comes back, I mean, all these women's schools, I mean, that is the guy who's the hardline Taliban who had this regime which we said just is intolerable, reactionary, 13th century and all that. And if Americans are dying, but that's acceptable, get the Americans out of there.
That's something that we can't paper over, is it? The fact that when we leave, we understand there are going to be some very terrible things happening, especially to women.
Well, the question would be, are they willing to accept women? Women are in the government now. Women are ministers, cabinet ministers. Yeah. So they would have to come up with a peace agreement where they would accept the Constitution of Afghanistan, which extends rights to women and others.
But this gets to a larger point, too, which is that we went in, and because we had to go in and because we need to build support for going in, we enlarged the scope of the war. In 1999, we weren't hearing a lot of calls to invade Afghanistan because the situation was intolerable. It was after we were attacked that we began hearing calls to invade Afghanistan. And the part that we couldn't really do, maybe we can make gains on it, as you're saying, but the part that we couldn't really do was remake that society as a liberal democracy, as a liberal pluralistic democracy. And we're now seeing that in the end game, no matter how it happens, even if it comes out pretty good for us at the end of the day, it's still, when we leave there, when we walk out of there, it is not going to fulfill all of the rhetorical objectives we laid out at the beginning.
Look at what Afghanistan was culturally. Right. Forget about international terror. In 99, 2000, remember the religious shrines that were being defaced?
Sure.
You'd see them on the front of the New York Times. Buddhists blown up. That's going to happen again. But you know what? Horrors are happening in Africa. They're happening across the globe. We don't have the ability.
I agree 100%.
To make the world
ought to look this
the perfect
in the face.
place.
And what's going to happen? What it's going to mean if Mullah Omar's come back and they all come back, it means that for at least about 8 years from 2002, after we took down the Tora Bora thing, Americans died in considerable numbers. We wasted enormous amounts of money. And we lost. It was in vain because the people we threw out came back into power.
I don't buy that. If Afghanistan is no longer the epicenter of international terror.
We did that, Joe, in 2001.
Well, okay. Well, then, but we did not lose. Our objective going in was to stop it from being a safe haven. If you want to look at what happened from 2003 forward, 2004 forward, and criticize it, I think that's very legitimate.
I'm not sure I'd agree, too, that in 02 we'd finish that objective.
Well,
there was a need to build up some level of civil society and some level of internal Afghanistan capability to make sure it didn't easily revert. Now, I think the interesting question is, does it revert? Are we going to be confident that when we leave there, the things we believe we have done will stick? But it'll take a long time.
We just won't know.
You can't
this will be
put a constitution when these guys come back in, boom.
And the real
these are serious people.
The real challenge could be next door, Pakistan.
Well, exactly. So let's move on, Ezra. Well, your dad's coming in. We'll talk to him. And I'll be quiet, as I am with you during breaks. So Ezra, I read the New York Times this past weekend. Republicans are saying we may not take over the majority. And I read it and laughed, said they're spinning. They're trying to spin Zeleny, the guy you can't spin. And then I hear you're saying,
but I'm not saying
Democrats may lose 86 seats.
So you're hearing something wrong. So here's what I'm saying. A Gallup poll came out yesterday.
Right.
And it showed three things. If you ask registered voters who they're going to vote for, it's Republicans 46-43. Very manageable loss for Democrats.
Close.
Now Gallup does two other things. It creates a likely voter poll, the people they think will